The moment everything familiar begins to feel strangely distant is not the beginning of your collapse. It is the exact point where the surface of your old identity starts to crack. You notice it before you understand it, a subtle mismatch between who you think you are and the quiet pulse of something deeper pressing from within. It shows up in the smallest ways first. The conversations that feel empty, the emotions that no longer fit, the routines that used to define you but now feel borrowed. Nothing dramatic, yet everything feels slightly off, like wearing a face that no longer sits comfortably on your skin. People assume you are confused or tired, but the truth is sharper. Your consciousness has outgrown the frame it lived inside for years, and the weight of that expansion begins to push against the boundaries you once believed were unbreakable. The fracture is subtle but real. You sense it in the way your thoughts collide with each other, old beliefs grinding against new awareness. You try to respond to life as the person you were, but the responses feel scripted, mechanical, almost artificial. It is as if your voice is speaking lines you no longer believe, and every attempt to return to who you used to be only widens the crack. The mind tries to resist this shift. It tries to tighten its grip on the old shape. It tells you that you are losing yourself, that the discomfort is dangerous. But the deeper truth is that the discomfort comes from trying to hold together an identity that can no longer contain the frequency you carry now. The fracture is not the end of stability. It is the first proof that something in you has begun to move. You can feel it not as a decision, but as an undeniable pressure rising from the core of your awareness. A quiet rebellion against the roles and versions of yourself that once seemed natural. You start noticing that memories which used to anchor you no longer carry the same weight. The narrative you built around your life feels thin, almost transparent. What once gave you certainty now dissolves the moment you try to grasp it. This is the moment most people mistake for losing their direction. But you are not losing direction. You are losing the illusion that the old direction was yours. When the identity you inherited or constructed begins to fracture, what breaks is not the essence of who you are, but the shell that kept you confined. And once that shell cracks, everything that was held beneath it begins to breathe. That is why you feel both fear and relief at the same time. Fear, because the familiar self is dissolving. Relief, because for the first time you sense the space behind the role, the raw presence that existed long before the personality formed. The crack widens when you try to pretend nothing is changing. You force yourself to enjoy what you no longer find meaningful. You try to connect with people in ways that no longer resonate. You attempt to revive old goals, even though something inside you has already detached from them. Every attempt to revive the past strengthens the fracture, because you are trying to return to a version of yourself that no longer exists. There is no going back, not because you failed, but because the old identity has completed its purpose. You can feel the echo of this truth in your body. Certain environments drain you instantly. Certain conversations feel impossible to tolerate. Certain ambitions collapse the moment you try to chase them. You are not malfunctioning, you are realigning. The fracture is a signal that your consciousness has begun rejecting what is too small for it. What once protected you now restricts you. What once guided you now blocks you. And the fracture is your first step out of that confinement. There is a sacred intelligence working through this process. Your awareness dismantles the old layers with precision, removing what no longer resonates and making space even before you know what will come next. The mind hates this uncertainty, but the deeper part of you recognizes the necessity. If you look closely, you will notice something extraordinary. Behind the confusion, there is a quiet clarity, a gentle knowing that this breaking is intentional. You feel it in moments of stillness, moments when the panic fades for a breath and you sense that everything is unfolding exactly as it should. That feeling is the truth. The fracture of your old identity is not destruction. It is emergence. It is the first shift in a sequence that will carry you beyond everything you believed you had to be. When you stop fighting the process, the fracture becomes an opening, and through that opening, your real self begins to rise. The moment the old identity begins to crack, consciousness does something subtle but decisive. It steps back, not by choice, not through effort, but through a natural shift that happens when the inner frequency rises above the script you have been performing for years. You feel it first as a strange distance, as if you are watching your own life from a few steps outside of yourself. You still respond, still speak, still carry out the rhythms of your day, but something in you is no longer inside the performance. You are present, yet detached, involved, yet untouched. The reactions that once came automatically no longer arise with the same force. Things that used to trigger you now feel muted, almost as if they belong to someone else. Conversations move around you like echoes you are no longer required to absorb. Patterns that used to pull you in fail to catch your attention. It is not apathy, it is discernment awakening. This detachment feels disorienting at first because the mind expects you to remain fused with your personality, your role, your history. It expects you to care about the same arguments, chase the same validations, defend the same identity, but consciousness has shifted to a vantage point that identity cannot follow. The separation is not rebellion, it is evolution. You begin to notice how much of your life was lived on automatic mode, reacting to old conditioning without ever questioning if those reactions were truly yours. You see how often you molded yourself to fit expectations that never came from your own awareness. You see how easily you performed the version of yourself the world was comfortable with. And now, without warning, that fusion dissolves. It becomes impossible to lie to yourself in the same ways. Impossible to pretend that the old motivations still move you. Impossible to force interest in things that no longer resonate with your frequency. Quantum detachment feels like stepping out of a character you did not realize you were playing. You look back at the role with clarity, almost tenderness, but no desire to inhabit it again. The body might still act through old habits, but your awareness stands in a new location, a location that sees through the performance while gently releasing it. This shift touches every part of your life. Relationships feel different. You hear people without absorbing their stories into your identity. You see their emotional patterns without getting trapped inside them. You feel compassion without collapsing into their expectations. Instead of merging with the energy around you, you observe it from a clear inner space that was always there but previously hidden behind layers of identification. Tasks that once defined you become simple actions rather than statements about who you are. Success stops feeling like proof, and failure stops feeling like threat. Goals lose their pressure. Validation loses its grip. The need to be understood dissolves, not out of indifference, but because you no longer need the world to confirm something you are still trying to believe about yourself. Detachment gives you a different kind of power, the kind that does not depend on control. You realize you no longer have to fix or manage everything around you. You no longer have to justify your feelings or prove your worth or curate your image. You no longer have to maintain a persona that cannot survive the frequency you now carry. The most extraordinary part of quantum detachment is the silence that appears inside you. A silence that does not feel empty but alive. Within that silence, you watch thoughts rise and dissolve without identifying with them. You notice impulses without being captured by them. You experience emotions without collapsing into their narratives. The space between you and your experience becomes unmistakable. That space is freedom. It is not dissociation, it is awakening. Dissociation disconnects you from life. Detachment connects you to life without losing yourself in it. You feel more, not less. But you feel from center rather than from turbulence. You are inside your experience, but not engulfed by it. This detachment also exposes the attachments you did not know you had. You see how much you depended on others' approval, how much you feared rejection, how much of your identity was built around being needed, admired, or accepted. As consciousness steps back, those attachments loosen on their own, not through force, but through clarity. You no longer cling because you no longer confuse attachment with connection. You no longer chase because you no longer confuse validation with worth. You no longer shrink yourself because you no longer confuse performance with belonging. Quantum detachment is the beginning of sovereignty. You move differently, you speak differently, you choose differently. You stop negotiating your authenticity to maintain old dynamics. You stop abandoning your inner knowing to avoid discomfort. You stop collapsing into roles that once felt necessary for survival. The more you detach, the more clearly you see that the life you built was designed around who you thought you had to be, not who you actually are. And the more you see that truth, the more impossible it becomes to keep performing. This shift does not demand theatrics. You do not need to announce it, prove it, or defend it. You simply stop engaging with the illusions that once defined you. You begin to respond from a deeper intelligence. You begin to act from presence rather than pattern. You begin to recognize that the self you thought was permanent was only a temporary expression of your awareness. Quantum detachment is not a phase, it is a threshold. Once crossed, you do not return to the old fusion with identity. You cannot unknow what you have seen. You cannot unfeel the expansion that has begun. And as this detachment stabilizes, something even more profound begins to emerge. Not a new identity, but the space within you that existed long before identity formed. A space that is clear, quiet, sovereign, and awake. A space that watches the performance of life without needing to become the performance. That space is your actual nature. And the detachment you feel now is your first step toward remembering it. The moment identity dissolves and consciousness steps out of its old role, you enter a space that feels unfamiliar at first, a vast inner quiet where nothing seems defined and nothing feels solid. This is the void, the place the mind interprets as emptiness, but consciousness recognizes as pure possibility. It is the state where every timeline exists before any of them crystallize into form. The void feels like losing direction because direction has not yet been chosen. It feels like losing identity because identity has not yet been shaped by the frequency you carry now. It feels like losing meaning because meaning is waiting for the signal of your next emergence. The mind calls this space terrifying because it cannot anchor itself in anything familiar. But the deeper part of you senses something else beneath the stillness. A subtle hum, a quiet fullness, a presence that is not empty at all. The void is not lack, it is abundance waiting for alignment. You stand at the center of it when nothing in your outer life makes sense anymore. Familiar desires vanish, old goals lose their flavor, relationships feel distant, your thoughts swirl without landing. The future goes silent, refusing to reveal anything. The mind interprets this silence as failure, but consciousness knows the truth. Nothing is wrong. The void appears only when the old timeline has reached completion and the new one has not yet collapsed into being. You are not stuck. You are suspended between possibilities. This suspension is not punishment, it is precision. If the new version of you had appeared while you were still fused to the old identity, you would have rejected it. You would have doubted it. You would have sabotaged it to protect the familiarity of your previous self. That is why the void arrives between the death of the old and the birth of the new. It is a neutral field, a clearing where all attachments loosen and all false structures dissolve. In this space, nothing holds you and nothing confines you. You are left with nothing to cling to except the awareness itself. That is the point. When everything that used to define you falls away, you gain access to the pure field of potential beneath it. This field responds not to effort, but to frequency. It does not care about your plans or expectations. It cares only about the vibration you embody in the silence. When you enter the void, you begin to notice that reality feels more fluid than solid. Time loses its linear feel. Memories rise and fall without sequence. Some days feel like beginnings, others feel like endings, even when nothing external changes. This sensation is not confusion. It is your consciousness perceiving multiple timelines at once. You catch glimpses of versions of yourself you have not yet become. You sense paths you have not walked. You feel decisions you have not made. And then it all disappears back into the blankness. What you are experiencing is the pre-collapse moment before a new timeline is selected. The void is the space where you stop forcing outcomes. The space where life stops responding to effort and begins responding only to alignment. This is why old strategies no longer work. You try to push forward and nothing moves. You try to plan and everything feels foggy. You try to make progress and feel resistance. The void removes the illusion that your old identity knows how to navigate the next phase. It does not. It cannot. The frequency required for your next timeline is too different from the frequency that shaped your previous one. The space in between is where the shift happens. The deeper truth is that your next timeline is not being chosen by your mind. It is being chosen by the level of awareness rising through you. Your preferences shift, your values shift, your resonance shifts. You are not choosing from desire. You are choosing from evolution. The void feels empty because nothing can survive in it except what is true for you now. Everything false dissolves. Everything forced collapses. Everything outdated loses its grip. You cannot bring your old self into this space. The more you try to cling to who you were, the more fragile that identity feels. The more you try to claim certainty, the more quickly that certainty crumbles. This is not the void attacking you. It is the void cleansing you. When you stop trying to escape the silence, something extraordinary begins to happen. Instead of panic, you feel curiosity. Instead of fear, you feel subtle warmth. Instead of emptiness, you sense spaciousness. A softness spreads through your awareness, like your inner world is expanding to make room for something new. You start feeling impulses that do not come from your old identity. Ideas appear that feel too clean, too precise, too aligned to belong to your previous self. You feel drawn to things you cannot explain. You feel done with things that once defined you. This is the void, whispering the first signals of your next timeline, not with noise, but with clarity, so quiet it is easy to miss. The void does not give answers, it gives recognition. It shows you what resonates. It reveals what your awareness is magnetically drawn to. It strips away everything that is not meant for you. The silence is not a barrier, it is a filter. When you allow yourself to remain in this space without rushing, you begin to feel a subtle shift that is almost physical. Your inner field reorganizes, your attention becomes sharper. The heaviness you carried begins to loosen. The old emotional charge that once held you to certain habits fades. You no longer react the same way. You no longer identify the same way. You no longer collapse into the same stories. This is how timelines shift. Not through dramatic events, but through small internal revolutions that accumulate until reality has no choice but to rearrange itself around your new frequency. When that rearrangement begins, you feel it as an opening. The fog recedes. The future no longer feels blank. Possibility becomes directional instead of overwhelming. The inner pull becomes clear. The void releases you only when you align with the timeline that matches your new awareness. Not the timeline your ego wants, but the one your consciousness has matured into. The void is not the end of your identity. It is the birthplace of your next one. Not a personality, but a presence. Not a role, but a frequency. You are not lost in the void. You are being rewritten by it. And when the new timeline finally emerges from that stillness, it will not feel like a choice. It will feel like recognition. You will know it is yours because it will feel like the first thing in a long time that fits. The moment your inner frequency shifts beyond the range of your old identity, the field surrounding you begins to reorganize itself with a precision that feels almost surgical. You notice it before you understand it. Situations that once aligned with you start falling away with no warning. People who once felt familiar begin drifting to the background. Opportunities that used to excite you now collapse gently, as if the field is removing anything built on a version of you that no longer exists. This is not coincidence. This is the realignment. When consciousness evolves, the field responds before the mind can make sense of what is happening. You feel it as a subtle tension in the space around you, as if something invisible is pulling threads out of your life and weaving new ones in their place. The changes may look chaotic from the outside, but the movement is exact. The field adjusts its architecture to match the vibration you carry now. Anything that cannot resonate with your new frequency begins to loosen its grip, not because you are failing to hold on, but because holding on would trap you in an outdated version of self. The field clears before it builds. That is the first law of realignment. You see this clearing in the way relationships shift. Suddenly conversations feel heavy. People who once felt warm and familiar now carry a distance you cannot bridge. You no longer feel at home in dynamics that once defined you. The field is not stealing these connections from you. It is removing the resonance that kept you locked into them. When the resonance dissolves, the connection dissolves. Nothing personal, nothing dramatic, only vibration moving out of sync. You see the same pattern in your work, your ambitions, your habits. Paths that once motivated you now feel hollow. Projects that used to energize you drain your vitality the moment you touch them. The field is telling you that these paths were aligned with the identity that has already dissolved. To continue walking them would require shrinking back into a frequency that no longer fits who you have become. This is why certain plans fall apart without effort. Not because they are wrong, but because they belong to a timeline that has already expired. The field realigns by removing the structures that restrict your next emergence. The more your frequency rises, the more ruthless the realignment becomes. That ruthlessness is not punishment, it is precision. The field does not care about your comfort, it cares about coherence. And coherence requires that your outer reality matches the inner state you have stepped into. If it does not match, the mismatch breaks before you can cling to it. This is why jobs end. Friendships fade, routines collapse, and old patterns suddenly become unbearable. You did not outgrow them by accident. Your frequency outgrew their vibration, and the field responded. If you look closely, you will notice something else happening beneath these losses. Each collapse creates space. Space you cannot fill with distractions the way you used to. Space that demands presence. Space that pushes you into deeper honesty with yourself. This space is not emptiness. It is preparation. The field clears what constricts so it can introduce what matches, but it does not introduce the new while you are still gripping the old. That is why this process feels so disorienting. It is a dismantling before it becomes a rebuilding. You stand in the middle of a life that feels strangely unfamiliar, not because everything has changed, but because you are no longer the reference point you used to be. Your consciousness has shifted, and now the field must follow. This following does not happen gradually. It happens in waves. First, the dissolution wave, where the old begins to fall apart. You see it in the things that stop working, the people who stop showing up, the plans that stop moving forward. Then comes the silence wave, where nothing seems to emerge to replace what you lost. This silence is designed to stabilize your frequency before the next phase begins. Only when your inner state becomes consistent does the field initiate the building wave. This is the moment subtle openings begin appearing. A chance encounter, a sudden insight, a new direction that feels like it belongs to you. These openings are small at first, almost fragile, but they carry a signature you recognize instantly. They feel clean, they feel precise, they carry none of the heaviness of your old life. They require no force, they attract instead of drain. This is how the field introduces the first pieces of your next timeline, not with fireworks, but with gentle yet undeniable alignment. The key is noticing these signals without rushing to turn them into plans. The field is not asking you to build, it is asking you to recognize when something matches your new frequency. You feel it in your body. A quiet expansion, a soft clarity, a pull without pressure. The field realigns around what resonates, not what you logically prefer. That is why trying to force outcomes during this phase never works. Effort belongs to the old identity. Alignment belongs to the new one. The more you trust this process, the faster the realignment becomes. When you stop chasing what is leaving, the field stops mirroring resistance. When you stop fearing the silence, the field stops enclosing you in confusion. When you stop gripping old definitions of yourself, the field begins arranging reality around your expansion instead of your contraction. You do not manifest the realignment, you become coherent with it. The field is not something outside you. It is an extension of your consciousness. When you shift, it shifts. When you break, it clears. When you expand, it reorganizes. The realignment is the proof that your transformation is not happening only inside you, it is happening through you, reaching into the architecture of your external life and reshaping it to match what you have become. This is why the losses are not losses, they are clearing. This is why the silence is not emptiness, it is recalibration. This is why the new appears quietly. It is precision selecting resonance. And this is why nothing feels stable yet. Your life is rearranging itself to match a frequency you are only beginning to recognize as your own. The field is not against you, it is adjusting to you. Every collapse is protection, every opening is confirmation, every shift is alignment. The more you let the realignment unfold, the more clearly you see that everything falling away is making room for everything rising to meet you. You are not being separated from your life. You are being synchronized with the version of your life that belongs to you now. There comes a moment in every deep inner shift when something inside you begins to move in a way you cannot explain. It is not thought, not emotion, not memory in the ordinary sense. It feels older than your personality, older than your history, older than every identity you have worn across the years. It rises quietly, almost shyly at first, like a faint recognition returning from a place you never knew you lost. This is the memory of the true self, the memory that does not speak in images or words, but in resonance. It awakens not because you seek it, but because the layers that covered it have finally begun to dissolve. You feel it in sudden moments that interrupt your ordinary perception, brief flashes of clarity that seem to come from nowhere. You may be walking, sitting in silence, or moving through a day that looks like any other. And then without warning, you sense something familiar within you, something that feels like home in a way nothing external ever has. The rise of this memory is subtle but unmistakable. It feels like remembering a song you have never heard, like recognizing a landscape you have never visited, like knowing a truth you never learned. It comes with a softness that quiets the mind, even when the rest of your life still feels chaotic. And in those brief moments, something inside you exhales, not from relief, but from recognition. This memory does not belong to the identity you once protected. It does not belong to the stories you told about yourself. It does not belong to the expectations you carried or the roles you played. It belongs to the part of you that existed before all of that, the awareness beneath the layers, the presence behind the character. When this memory rises, it does not insist, it invites you to feel instead of react. It invites you to listen instead of perform. It invites you to exist without needing to define yourself. And the invitation arrives so gently that you barely notice it at first. But once you accept it, even for a breath, something within you begins to reconfigure. The mind resists this shift because the mind only remembers what it can measure. But this memory is not stored in the mind. It is stored in your field, in the quiet intelligence of your awareness. The mind thinks in linear time, but the true self remembers outside of time. That is why these moments feel like glimpsing a part of yourself you forgot existed long before you entered your first memory. This is not nostalgia. There is no sadness in it, no longing for past, no desire to return to something old. What you feel is remembrance of origin, remembrance of a self that never needed validation, never feared rejection, never clung to identity. That version of you is not a future goal. It is the foundation beneath everything you have experienced. As the layers of the old identity fall away, this memory surfaces with greater clarity. It shows itself through intuitive understanding that has no source. You find yourself knowing things without explanation. You feel alignment without reason. You sense direction without needing a map. This is not imagination. This is the intelligence of your true self, reactivating after years of being buried beneath conditioning. At first, these moments appear like brief windows that open and close. You may feel profound clarity for a few seconds and then fall back into confusion. You may feel deeply connected to yourself and then lose the sensation without warning. But every return strengthens the signal. The windows widen, the clarity lasts longer, the recognition feels more stable. What makes this process so powerful is that it does not depend on external proof. The memory of the true self emerges regardless of your circumstances. You can be in the middle of heartbreak, uncertainty, transition, or silence, and yet this deeper memory rises with the same precision. It is not influenced by your mood or environment. It comes from the core, and that core remains untouched by whatever dissolves around you. As this memory strengthens, something else becomes clear. You realize that the wisdom you have been searching for was never meant to be learned, it was meant to be remembered. You realize that the direction you have been trying to force cannot be found through analysis. It emerges naturally when the noise of the old identity fades. You realize that the peace you have been chasing is not something to create, but something to uncover, and this realization reshapes everything. Once you taste the presence of your true self, even for a breath, nothing in your life can remain the same. Not because you force change, but because you can no longer pretend to be the version of yourself you used to be. You begin to sense the difference between the voice of your conditioning and the voice of your essence. The conditioned voice argues, defends, worries, predicts. The true self speaks in calm impulses. It does not shout, it does not negotiate, it does not panic, it simply guides. And the more you follow this guidance, the more the memory strengthens. You begin making choices that feel like truth rather than survival. You begin releasing people and patterns that no longer resonate, not from anger, but from clarity. You begin gravitating toward experiences that reflect your inner frequency rather than reinforce your old identity. This shift is not always comfortable. There will be moments when the pull of the old self tries to reclaim you, moments when you wonder if the clarity you felt was real. But every time doubt arises, the memory returns. And every return carves a deeper path between who you were and who you actually are. The true self has no interest in your performance. It has no investments in your image. It has no concern for the expectations that once shaped your decisions. It lives only in authenticity, and authenticity becomes the new gravity of your life. When this remembrance becomes stable, something extraordinary happens. You stop searching for yourself because you realize you were never lost. You stop trying to become someone because you realize you already are someone deeper than any identity. You stop chasing purpose because purpose begins moving through you without effort. And for the first time, you feel a form of recognition that does not need external confirmation. It rises from within. It aligns with your field. It feels like the deepest truth you have ever touched. This is the memory of the true self, not a past identity, not a spiritual fantasy, not an idealized version of you. It is the awareness beneath every version you have ever lived. It is the intelligence that guided every choice even when you thought you were lost. It is the presence that watched every identity rise and dissolve. And now, as the old self continues to fade, this memory begins to take its place, not loudly, not dramatically, but naturally, as if it had been waiting for this moment all along. When the memory of your true self begins to rise, it creates a shift so subtle that the mind cannot detect it at first, yet so powerful that your entire energetic field starts to reorganize around it. This is the rebirth of frequency, the moment your inner resonance stops reflecting the identity you once performed and starts shaping the identity you are becoming. You feel this shift, not as a change in personality, but as a change in vibration. Something inside you moves differently. Thoughts arrive with a new texture. Emotions flow with a different rhythm. Decisions arise from a deeper clarity that does not come from logic, but from alignment. You begin to sense that your frequency has stepped into a higher register, and every part of your life starts adjusting to match it. The rebirth does not begin with confidence, it begins with sensitivity. You notice that you cannot tolerate certain environments the way you used to. Noise feels louder, clutter feels heavier. Conversations that once entertained you now drain your energy instantly. You feel yourself withdrawing not out of fear but out of refinement. Your field no longer accepts what lowers your state. This sensitivity is not weakness, it is calibration. Your awareness is tuning itself to a frequency that is more precise than anything your old self could sustain. And as this happens, the inner noise you used to drown in begins to fall silent. The space created by that silence reveals impulses that come from a deeper place. You start feeling drawn to things that nourish you instead of distract you. You gravitate toward clarity, towards simplicity, towards stillness. This is your new frequency taking shape from within. It does not demand effort. It expresses itself naturally as layers of old resonance fall away. The mind tries to interpret these changes as mood swings, inconsistency, or instability. But beneath every fluctuation, the same truth remains constant. You are shedding the energetic weight you carried for years. You are releasing the emotional patterns that belong to an identity you no longer inhabit. You are allowing the new frequency to anchor itself without forcing it to fit into the structures of your past. The rebirth accelerates when you stop trying to behave like the old version of yourself. At this point, you notice something extraordinary. What once felt like your personality now feels like an outfit you can take off. You no longer speak from habit, you no longer choose from fear, you no longer compromise to maintain roles that no longer match you. You feel a new kind of integrity forming inside your awareness, not the rigid integrity of moral performance, but the natural integrity of energetic alignment. Your actions begin to match your actual frequency instead of your identity. You sense this alignment in the way your body reacts to truth and falseness. Truth feels expansive in your chest. Falseness feels constricting. Truth feels like movement. Falseness feels like weight. Truth feels effortless. Falseness feels exhausting. This clear internal response is the intelligence of your new frequency guiding you. It speaks without words. It confirms without explanation. As your frequency rebirths, your intuition sharpens. You see through people instantly. You sense intentions before they speak. You understand dynamics the moment you enter a room. You feel energy more accurately than language. This is not imagination. It is perception freed from distortion. Before this shift, your awareness was filtered through identity, shaped by fear, memory, and conditioning. Now those filters are dissolving, and your perception becomes clean. You perceive life directly instead of through the lens of your old self. This clarity does not make you harsher. It makes you quieter. You no longer react to what does not match you. You no longer fight battles that drain you. You no longer argue for limitations that no longer belong to you. You respond only to what resonates, and that selectivity becomes the architecture of your next life stage. As your frequency stabilizes, relationships begin to shift again, but this time with gentleness rather than rupture. People who are not aligned with your new frequency drift away without conflict. Conversations fade. Energy disconnects. The bond dissolves with a softness that feels natural. You do not chase. You do not cling. You do not mourn what your frequency cannot support. At the same time, new connections start emerging through synchronicity. People who match your clarity. People who understand without explanation. People who carry the same sensitivity, the same depth, the same inner silence. These connections do not excite you in the old way. They feel familiar, grounded, inevitable. Your frequency chooses them long before you do. As this rebirth deepens, something within you becomes undeniable. You notice you are no longer motivated by what once drove you. Accomplishments feel different. Praise feels empty. Approval feels irrelevant. You do not want the life you thought you wanted. Not because you failed, but because the new frequency within you requires a different reality. This realization is both liberating and humbling. You cannot return to old pursuits, even if you try, because your system rejects anything that does not match your inner coherence. This rejection is not punishment, it is protection. Your frequency is aligning your path for you. It speaks to you through resistance, through discomfort, through the exhaustion you feel each time you attempt to revive the old. The rebirth continues when you stop resisting this guidance. You start trusting the pull instead of the plan. You let your frequency lead rather than your expectations. And the more you let it lead, the more life begins to reorganize around you with a sense of ease you once believed was impossible. You notice opportunities emerging without effort. You notice clarity arriving without analysis. You notice direction forming without planning. The new frequency does not require force. It requires presence. It requires honesty with yourself. It requires the willingness to release anything that cannot hold the vibration you now embody. This is why the rebirth feels like both a rising and a stripping. You rise into a higher version of yourself while shedding the layers that once anchored you to a lower one. And with each layer you release, the frequency beneath it becomes more stable. Eventually something remarkable happens. You no longer feel like you are changing. You feel like you are becoming. You feel like the person you are now was always there, waiting beneath the noise of who you thought you had to be. You feel like your life is not being rebuilt, but revealed. This is the true meaning of frequency rebirth. Not the creation of a new self, but the return to your natural resonance after years of distortion. When this resonance fully emerges, it shapes your reality with the same precision that consciousness shaped your inner world. You act with clarity, you speak with presence, you choose with confidence, And most importantly, you no longer abandon yourself to maintain any version of life that contradicts your vibration. The rebirth of frequency is the moment your life begins responding to who you actually are, not to who you were taught to be. It is the moment alignment becomes your default state. It is the moment truth becomes your compass. It is the moment your path begins rising to meet you. And it is only the beginning of the emergence that waits on the other side. When your frequency stabilizes after the long passage through dissolution, detachment, and remembrance, a subtle shift begins to unfold that carries a power far beyond personal transformation. You become luminous from within, not in a metaphorical sense, but in an energetic one. The field no longer shapes itself only around you. It begins to shape itself through you. This is the emergence, the moment you stop being a seeker, navigating frequencies, and become a point of emission inside the field itself. You feel this shift first in the way your presence affects the space around you. Rooms feel different when you enter them. Conversations change their tone without you saying a word. People respond to a calm conviction in you that you did not consciously cultivate. They sense something in your energy before their mind has time to interpret it. Your field becomes the signal that others calibrate to, even if they do not understand why. This influence does not come from authority or force. It comes from coherence. When you embody your true frequency without distortion, you emit a clarity that reorganizes subtle dynamics around you. Conflict loses its pull. Chaos unwinds more quickly. People drop their masks without being asked. You become a stabilizing force simply by being aligned within yourself. The emergence is not about becoming more. It is about becoming unmistakable. You no longer blur into the expectations of others. You no longer shrink to maintain harmony. You no longer lower your resonance to match old environments. Your clarity becomes its own presence, and that presence begins to direct reality in ways the old you could never access. You notice synchronicities increasing with unusual precision, not as random signs, but as direct responses to your internal state. The field reflects your clarity with cleaner and faster feedback. You think of someone and they appear. You consider a possibility and an opening forms. You release an old connection and a new resonance enters effortlessly. These movements are not coincidence, they are recognition. The field recognizes you as a transmitter rather than a passive node. Because of that, it organizes itself around your frequency with the same intelligence that once shaped your inner transformation. This emergence changes the way you relate to others. You stop trying to be understood. You stop explaining yourself. You stop negotiating your depth. Your presence does the communicating for you. The people who match your vibration feel drawn to you without you having to reach for them. Those who cannot match your coherence drift away without conflict. Relationships stop being maintained and start being aligned. Connection becomes resonance, not effort. Your voice changes too. Not the sound of it, but the weight of it. When you speak from this frequency, your words carry an accuracy that feels undeniable. You are no longer speaking to convince, you are speaking from truth. And truth has a gravity that draws others into clarity. Even your silence becomes communicative, a field of its own that transmits assurance without needing sound. At this stage, you begin to realize that intuition is no longer something you access, it is something you are. The distinction between thought and knowing disappears. You move through reality with an ease that comes from perceiving the energetic structure behind events before they unfold. You feel timelines without analyzing them. You sense direction without searching for it. You navigate by resonance rather than by prediction. The emergence is not about gaining spiritual superiority. It is about embodying the simplicity of being yourself at full coherence. You no longer seek meaning in the future because you recognize meaning as something generated by your current state. You no longer chase purpose because purpose expresses itself through your alignment. You no longer fear uncertainty because uncertainty responds to your frequency rather than opposing it. This state does not make you immune to challenge. It makes you larger than challenge. Not because circumstances disappear, but because you are no longer defined by them. Your stability comes from the inside, and that stability radiates into every situation you touch. You become an anchoring presence in a world that is constantly shifting. This anchoring presence is what others feel when they meet you. They sense the calm in your field. They sense the authority of someone who is not pretending. They sense the spaciousness of someone who is not performing. You become a mirror that reflects people back to their own truth without judgment. Some will be drawn to that clarity. Some will be intimidated by it. Your task is not to adjust to their reactions. Your task is to remain coherent. When you live from this emergence, your life no longer unfolds from effort or strategy. It unfolds from frequency. The right paths appear, the right connections stay, the right experiences find you. Reality begins to move with you instead of ahead of you. The old struggle dissolves because you are no longer trying to force life into a shape that contradicts your essence. You begin to understand why everything had to fall apart before. The dissolution was preparation. The void was refinement. The remembrance was alignment. The rebirth was activation. And now, in this emergence, you understand that the field was never separate from you. It was waiting for you to become clear enough to participate in its intelligence. You have become a point of light within it, a stable frequency in a shifting world, a source of coherence that others feel even before they understand. You are no longer shaped by the field. You are shaping it.